All a government is a means of retaining power for the people who govern. Now, what's going to happen in the long run is that we're going to completely bypass the government. In fact, you know, none of the people that I know vote. We've all given up voting because it's a joke, it's a game. The government doesn't exist for us. They exist for themselves. And, you know, we're creating our own thing.
Of course, there was nothing new about Hoppy's anarchism. It went back 160 years to the writers Rousseau, Desardes and Proudhon, to the poet William Blake. It was a struggle towards total individual freedom, the belief that humanity is impeded by society, that society must be dismantled before people can reach their true potential. Anarchism had been the underlying belief of the best artists for 2 centuries, Rimbaud, Picasso, Breton. With the Dada movement and the Surrealist movement, the artists became politically militant. They made art to drive people mad. Like us, they displayed and published their own work outside the established system. Surrealism gave rise to a group called the International Situationists. They believed in disrupting everyday life with startling events, the nude in the high street, bundles of money thrown into the Seine. Ralph Rumney recalls their early meetings.
We, as situationists, we wanted to change the world. I mean, that was it. Doing something very strange, that could change the world. When the provosts were going in Paris, they used to loll about on the banks of the Seine just below the Prefecture de Police. And the police took offense at this and ordered the police to clear them off. Well, as you know, in France, nobody ever argues with the police. Well, the provost did. They just threw them in the Seine. Whereupon, I mean, and this is the kind of example of how something entirely unexpected can change things. The police spent a vast amount of money building a swimming pool and teaching policemen to swim. You know, I mean, that is true.
From my front bedroom study in Norwich, it looked as though the world was changing and it didn't seem to need me as an apostle anymore. Television news about Rudi Dutschke and the German students attacking the Springer newspaper in Berlin was both thrilling and reassuring. Top to bottom and left to right, we as a society believed we were moving forward, that new was better than old, that progress was inevitable.
As to what is possible, there are no limits other than those imposed by physical laws.
It is our hope to do a series of heart-alone transplants, and I hope that as soon as the first 4 patients have gone satisfactorily through a heart-alone transplantation, we'll be able to start on the block heart-lung transplantation.
10, 9, we have ignition sequence start. The engines are on. 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. We have liftoff.
But if you could go to the moon, why not go to paradise? If some doctors could give you eternal life, then this was the time to claim total freedom. And the higher education system looked as though it could be made into paradise, with a few crafty changes. When Greenacre Secondary Modern School found out what I'd been up to in London, I moved to the Regional College of Art in black old Bradford. In Bradford, libertarians like Albert Hunt had rigged things so that real progress could be made.
At that time, there was a lot of talk about free schools, about finding alternative forms to compulsory education, and we felt that if we could win that in the art colleges, there was a chance of extending it and winning it elsewhere. We were talking about the fact that we saw schools as oppressive institutions, but the very structure of a school meant that the teachers were the oppressors, and we were trying to invent ways of finding a form of education that would enable the pupils to free themselves. That's not even on the agenda any longer.
You see, higher education had tripled its scale in the mid-60s. Grants were mandatory to all students admitted, and new universities were opened up from Lancaster to Colchester, from Bradford to Brighton. Freedom and the individual were the key words. Even my hidey hole in Norwich was a short bike ride from East Anglia University, a vast Aztec temple where Jonathan Raban was teaching.
it was conceived of as something like really Norwich Market. I mean, a great mass of stalls with coloured awnings, with a lecturer standing by each stall proffering a certain area of knowledge, and the student was invited to pick around and choose among the stalls. There'd be a certain backbone of courses which he'd have to take, but at the end of 3 years, every single student leaving the University of East Anglia would leave with a significantly different degree, one he put together himself, from every other student.
Following the Anderson Report in 1960, the new availability of grants meant that many new students were from the working class. Campus life had an extra meaning for young people from council estates. It meant a release from the strictures of the industrial neighbourhood. No Bethesda Chapel, no clanging time clocks, no clouds of grumpy woodbine smoke rising from behind the Pinkham. A young society in a new, free place.
I can remember when I first actually articulated the phrase, I want to go to university. I really might as well have been saying, I want to go to the moon. I mean, it was as unreal and as ludicrous as that to me. I can remember at the first night I was at LSE and meeting a bloke from Darlington and another bloke, I think, from Leeds, and we all sort of recognised each other by our accents. And we were all very tense at LSE, imagine, and, you know, all kind of looking at our pints and thinking, oh God, is it going to be awful or frightening, and, you know, people are going to laugh at us and everything. But I remember after a few pints, the three of us running down the Strand and running into Trafalgar Square and just jumping.
Pam Brighton, nowadays theatre director and barrister. For kids like this, the new education programme wasn't enough. Anyway, didn't it smack of the middle class magnanimously offering a privilege which was really a human right? A right the working class had been deprived of for centuries. Wasn't there a touch of the vicar's wife with her basket of sweeties for the poor? The generous hand was bound to get bitten.
The one thing that the new universities were not about was spoon-feeding their students. And what I think came out at the end, if the university was to be a success, was an articulate critic of the society in which he lived. Now, articulate critics are not easy people to live with.
In William Blake's poems, there's a character called Orc. Orc embodies healing, revolutionary violence, a sort of cleansing flame. In '68, that flame was flickering around Europe like chain lightning. Underground culture ignited it. The writings of Marcuse, Regis Debray, and Norman O. Brown informed it. Students all over the world moved into a tidal wave of action.
We feel that the universities do have a role to play, that the universities can be built into centers of revolutionary protest, and that the way for students to act in conjunction with workers is to act as a fuse, a spark which will act as a dynamite and set the rest of the community off. This, as we have seen, is what has happened in France.
In Paris, they occupied the Sorbonne, fired the Stock Exchange, and opened the Bastille. In Berlin, they battled with water cannons. Everywhere, intelligent young people lost faith in rational argument with an older generation that just didn't share their vision.
Parliament doesn't seem to achieve anything anywhere anymore. It's just a collection of old men working together for the interests of that generation and of property.
It comes to a point where you have to take direct action. Now this can involve a whole series of ways. It can involve taking over lectures and running them yourself. It can involve, as we've done here, setting up a free university and running our own sort of anti-university on this subject we would like to be seen taught.
I see demonstrations as important today because they're essentially inevitable, because they're one of the only ways of drawing attention to certain views and of achieving certain ends.
Do you mean to say that rattling taxis with ministers in it and being, as I would imagine, downright rude to other ministers and other places is your way of getting your point across? Don't you think that there are other ways that you can get your point across?
You name them.
think what was very clear was the infectiousness of demonstrations during 1968. Demonstrations became something which were pretty well sort of de rigueur, that you were not a proper university student, you were not at the proper university unless you could show at least one decent demonstration.
Can I get a word in edgeways?
Suddenly, the art schools, even the one where I taught at Bradford, was strafed with criticism from the new student generation. Those islands of amiable bohemianism with their dusty, paint-spattered studios, their creaking easels and their heavy-breasted models, they symbolized a kind of art that looked shabby beside the garish clothes and light shows of rock and roll. Students everywhere were occupying their colleges in order to appropriate their own educational program.
Next on the DIPAD painting exam, there were very severe restrictions placed on the people taking part. One of these was that no painting was to be smaller than 3 foot by 3 foot, and no painting was to be larger than 4 foot by 4 foot. No painting was to extend out the way, otherwise it would be sculpture and could not be examined within the painting course.
We had to do a composition, small figure composition to do with Greek mythology or something, and a friend of mine was modelling this female figure sprawled out across a lump of rock, and the head of the sculpture department came up to him and asked him what it was meant to be, and he said it was Leda from Leda and the Swan. And the job was inspected for a bit, and then the head of sculpture said, well, what are these flames here and here and here? And he said, well, they're not flames, they're hairs. And he said, well, you can't have hairs on sculpture, take them off. And he came back a bit later and said to him, well, could you just close the legs a bit, there's girls in the room.
This is Douglas Cameron reporting from the Hornsey College of Art in North London. It's airing your grievance day here, and this afternoon the students began to gather in the administrative centre to do just that. And in what they call a gesture of solidarity, they're going to stay there until 12 noon tomorrow, holding discussions and mass meetings. One of the leaders of the recently formed Action Committee, Kim Howells, expects 75% of the 900 students to turn up. I asked him exactly what their grievances were.
Well, we want to be brought into line with most other universities and colleges who have a far greater degree of effective student representation on course structures.
Why has nothing been done about these problems before now?
I think mainly because of the lack of communication between the college authorities and the students as a body.
Going up to Hornsey, I expected to find in London a great kind of a surge of discussion, of vibrant intellectual debate about art and about the place of art in society. And I get there and I find that, in fact, far from opening things up for me, they're actually closing things down. They're very concerned with notions of craft, of fitting somehow into this whole notion of a gallery system.
The two big Yorkshire art schools, Leeds and Bradford, had scrapped such petty restrictions just in time. Hornsey students visiting West Yorkshire back to their besieged college, knocked out by total student freedom. At Bradford, the Russian Revolution did throughout the city as a vast piece of theatre. At Leeds, the staff had even asked the ministry if they could stop awarding diplomas. The surrealist painter, Patrick Hughes, marked all students 100 as a gesture of his solidarity with the Hornsey spirit. Nonetheless, the students at Hornsey had lessons for us. Albert Hunt visited and glimpsed his dream realised.
They were using the whole situation as a basis for imaginative invention. You know, they were pouring out magazines, which weren't just solemn academic things, they were funny, they were drawing cartoons, and their whole art activity had suddenly gone into this business of having taken over and running the college.
We passed the time having a good time, first of all. That's just got to be said. I mean, there's a lot of nonsense talked about how important it was politically and how solemn the whole thing was, and people were kind of discussing politics. I mean, they were also screwing on the roof of Hornsey at the time when the place was surrounded by dogs, This is the first time in British history that guard dogs have been used to try and turf students out of an occupation. And I remember very well the very warm feeling many of us had up on that roof at hearing these dogs howling in the street, and this marvellous sort of thing going on upstairs.
No, don't stop the carnival. No, don't stop the carnival. You'll never find.
Every night they were having music groups who were there to support them, and so they were having dances. They were showing a lot of films. There was a sense of festival going on there the whole time, and this, as I say, was out of term time. They just stayed there at the end of term and taken the place over. There was very much a sense of festival going on there.
I remember, for instance, that the Daily Express sent a reporter up there to get the inside story on Hornsey, and we introduced her to a very good-looking guy who was a sculpture student, who immediately took her under his wing, and she didn't go back for 3 weeks. and so there was a lot of that going on. I mean, it was a very wild place in that sense.
No, don't stop the carnival. No, don't stop the carnival. You'll never find a better way. No, don't stop the carnival.
Late in '67, there was a big old-fashioned demonstration against the American presence in Vietnam. People sat down in Grosvenor Square just as they had done before in Trafalgar Square and in various embassies. I didn't, but I stood by and watched the police move them with unusual ferocity. By the time of the next Grosvenor Square demonstration in March '68, some lessons had been learned from Berlin. Passive resistance had disappeared with the duffel coat. By the second '68 demonstration, the October demonstration, I had abandoned my abortive search for an ivory tower and rejoined the struggle.
There was just a great mass of us interested in sending a very loud message to Lyndon Johnson to get out of Vietnam. What there was a great deal of energy which had to be channeled into something, and Vietnam was there for us to channel it into.
The gathering point was the embankment by Charing Cross. The weather was milky, mildly autumnal. I saw the French happenings artist, Jean-Jacques Lebel. He was with the French Maoists. Still euphoric from the Battle of the Sorbonne, he barely recognized me. The whole French contingent was alight with some weird joy of combat.
Which march are you going to be on?
If the Grosvenor Square march looks been probably the more violent, well, shall we say more interesting from my point of view, the fact that it probably will lead to violence. I'm not particularly interested in sort of just passive walking about.
The whole gathering was oddly silent. People kicked their feet against the embankment balustrade in the morning chill. The massing of groups was a slow business. Banners hung slackly. People fell into their columns with a trance-like patience.
Which march are you going to be on?
Well, I hope to be on a Vietnam.
Yeah, there are 2 Vietnam marches.
Well, the nearest one will do me, you know?
It's said that the one that's starting up from here is likely to run into more trouble than the other one.
Well, that's okay. It's okay. Yeah, so we like trouble.
You what?
Like trouble, don't we? Yeah, man.
Ho Chi Minh! Ho Chi Minh! Ho Chi Minh! Ho Chi Minh!
The streets of London are a good soundboard for marches. The chanting rang up the canyons of the Aldwych like booming water. I ran back to an anarchist some yards behind the Maoists. If we turn up Southampton Row, I said, we can start a third route, come into the square from an unexpected direction and bugger up the police defences. Who are you and which group do you represent? Asked the man with the flag. I felt a kind of sickness, as though I'd met someone who dreaded victory in case it ended the battle to which he'd become addicted. We entered the square in a kind of sullen trudge, shouting, scowling, applauded by crowds on the pavement. Faint-hearted marchers who wanted to avoid actual grappling joined the pavement crowd. There were waves, embraces, squeals of recognition as the veterans of the Year of Dreams reunited. I stuck with the main column until I stood facing a young policeman. I thought, I could have taught him. Maybe I did.
A solid mass of demonstrators, the third group of marchers, poured out of North Audley Street on the north corner of Grosvenor Square and tried to storm the embassy. The police cordon facing them was made up of 2 lines of policemen with arms linked. Behind them, some 20 mounted police, and below the embassy steps, coachloads of more policemen. Waving flags and banners, chanting and jeering, the demonstrators surged against the first cordon.
Most of us, as soon as real violence started, tried to get out of the way, tried to back off, and were pushed from the back, somehow miraculously to the front, and found ourselves face to face with a lot of sweating policemen being exhorted from behind to hold the line. It was quite clear that they didn't want to be there any more than we wanted to be confronting them. They were not what we were fighting against.
A policeman's helmet arched 40 feet into the air. Smoke bombs, flower bombs, red paint and fireworks followed. Some demonstrators used poles to try and force a way through. Stones flew and, according to one eyewitness, large steel ball bearings. The struggling was tough. One policeman was pulled down, horse and all.
A scuffle. About 5 young men in torn garments with earrings, necklaces, and one with orange hair, pre-punks, had caught a copper. He was down and they were flailing him with baseball bats. The police thrust into the crowd in a V formation and saved him. "Get the hair," a loud hailer said. The boy with the orange hair was grabbed, hurled back, held down by 3 police as we thrust forward.
Despite the fierceness of the struggle, the police cordon slowly forced the demonstrators back. But a large group broke into the center of the square, trampling daffodils, hedges and fencing, tearing up clods of earth and hurling them at the police. The police brought in reinforcements. Altogether, there were about 2,000 on duty to control the situation in central London.
Me of my having done my bit. Now I felt entitled to withdraw for a while, and curiously, I believe that everybody else did too.
What the demonstrations in Grosvenor Square made me feel was that we were pushing against something utterly immovable, and that we were getting our heads knocked in to no purpose whatsoever, to a certain extent being used by people who had a much tougher anti-American attitude than we had. It wasn't diminishing America's commitment to the war, and I think it made me feel very much more detached and much less willing to offer myself up as some sort of frontline First World War trenchman. And from then on, a feeling of disillusion tended to set in.
Revolutionary warrior of Blake's prophetic books had gone on leave. Some of us had such faith that success was our destiny, the battle now seemed superfluous. Mike Harris was the ordinary man who found himself used by the militants, but even leading figures like Kim Howells were disillusioned.
By the autumn of '68, I was finished with students. It seemed to me that the whole lot of them had just gone off on holiday, and the revolution of the late spring of '68 was all over. It certainly seemed that way in Paris to me, and it looked that way, I felt that way in London. And so I became very hostile towards students. I felt that it was the kind of middle class revert into type. They didn't seem to have any politics or any political discipline or anything. They didn't seem to have any real notion of politics. It had been a kind of a spasm. That's the way I felt by the autumn or the winter of '68, that it had been a kind of spasm which everybody had a damn good time, including me, and all right, well, it was over now.
Not only was it the middle class that was reverting to type, though. The working class reverted to type in a very nasty way.
I do not believe it is in human nature that a country such as ours should passively watch the transformation of whole areas which lie at the heart of it into alien territory.
Dock workers, with Enoch Powell's words ringing in their skulls, led by a left-wing hero, Jack Datch, straight into fascism. Where was the left? The workers' cause, if the workers had deserted it.
Enoch Powell woke the average man in the street up. The average man in the street wanted to say this, but he was afraid of going to jail. He was afraid of going to jail like Colin Jordan.
We want a complete ban on immigration, and we want all post-war immigrants sent back to their homelands.
This is our country. This is the greatest country on earth. And it's being polluted. It's being polluted because they bring their ways, but they don't want our ways.
There isn't any difference between the Labour and Tory parties. They have completely misrepresented the British people. They sanctimoniously expound the theory of majority rule in Rhodesia and South Africa, and they deny us the right of majority rule in our own country.
They're nothing but a filthy lot of swines.
Would you object if a coloured person came to live next door to you?
No, I got a good right, you're mad.
Our cherished myths about the simple goodies and baddies of the class war were fractured. No more notions of Teds, Mods, Rockers and Skinheads as spontaneous guerrillas of the left. Violence of a more brutal kind was emerging. And we, the shock troops of the alternative society, well, we'd always been bloody pacifists anyway, not least in our preparations for Grosvenor Square.
The German guys came across who were very political, very left-wing, and of course the English were like a bunch of bumblers. I mean, they didn't know the first thing about it. The Germans were saying, look, where's the plans for the square, where's this, that, the next thing? Don't you have any helmets or marbles or sticks? Or and they're going, no, you know, we don't do that. We just go along there and stand about.
Just stand about. There is something in the English psyche that flinches from ideals, an irony that tempers everything we do, a fatalism about the essential triviality of life. Heroism is something that happens by accident. Grand causes are pretentious, something the wogs do, and a bloody nuisance they are too. Certainly anarchism instructs us that the revolution begins in your own kitchen, but it's supposed to spread, not stay there. George Romney.
I went to Hornsey at one point. I went up there, you know, and there were sort of great arguments going on about, you know, who was going to make the tea and why should the girls make the scones or the buns or whatever they were eating, and or heat up the tin beans. I mean, this just seemed pathetic. Whereas when you think of the Sorbonne, the occupying committee had sent out telegrams and got the workers out on strike, in general strike, all over France.
One of our major difficulties was the canteen. Since last Tuesday, we've been working the canteen more or less 24 hours a day. And this has been done purely spontaneously. And I'd like to point out also, it's made a profit for one of the first times in a number of years.
The domestic arena, intended as the starting point of revolution, becomes the gravitational point. International issues become localized, and we can all go home to tea. And only the English would try to establish the Queensberry rules of riot in their campus politics. Jonathan Raven.
Were you supposed to be only obeying the law of the land, in which case you had policemen on campus, and if you did something that was arrestable under British law, then you could be carted off by police, but you couldn't be disciplined by the university authorities? Or was it the business of the university authorities to keep the police off the campus? Now, people would actually have riots about this in order to establish the ground rules under which you could conduct a riot. Now, quite a lot of those demonstrations were about on that level.
In Paris, Berlin, Mexico City, San Francisco, and Chicago, the clubs came out, the water cannon, the poison gas, the rifles. In England, we just looked at our watches and went home. Street fighting moved to Derry and Belfast. Maybe we felt a little upstaged. Immediately, the reaction set in.
I get a spate of letters about this, all hostile to the students, for instance, and nearly all saying, why should we pay our taxes for this? I mean, this is a very common theme. And I know in Parliament there are quite a lot of people beginning to think like this. And I'm worried that if this goes on and there is a great revolt, it would be very difficult to increase some of these expenditures.
And that was Patrick Gordon Walker, the Labour Minister of Education.
The consequences of those riots have stayed with us. The image of the student, the image of higher education, the kind of anti-intellectualism, the sense that sending somebody to university was simply creating somebody who is likely to be a danger to society. And if you do send him to university, you better make sure he does something useful and safe like computer sciences, and not something that's going to make him seriously think, like philosophy or sociology or English literature or history. We live with those riots that went off at half-cock, those small demos which were blown up by the press.
Stuart Christie, a veteran anarchist.
Certainly what happened in '68 gave a hell of a fright to the British government. They suddenly realised just how delicately and insecurely were the forces holding together modern Western society. It took it so seriously to heart that they ordered national security manoeuvres against the backdrop of the October anti-Vietnam War demonstration later that year. I don't know whether you remember, but they actually had paratroops on guard at Buckingham Palace. This was followed up with a really feverish growth in the powers of the police and security services. There were attempts to control the organised labour movement through legislation, the use of the army in a policing role in Northern Ireland, talk of setting up of private armies by David Stirling. All these things served only to confirm people's worst suspicions regarding the breakdown of consensus.
And what kind of a life is it now? We fight the longest civil war in history and pretend to be keeping the peace. Our children are agents of death, killing themselves with heroin, killing one another over football. With one ethical system dismantled and the alternative ethical system unformed, we condemn people to Heysel Stadium, to Toxteth, to Broadwater Farm, to the crass greed of yuppidom. There are 360 degrees in a revolution. We went 180 and left a mess. In came the authoritarian, like a new broom.
The trigger of today's outburst of crime and violence lies in the era and attitudes of post-war funk, which gave birth to the permissive society which has in turn generated the violent society. The permissives scorned traditional standards. Bad art was as good art. Grammar and spelling were no longer important. To be clean was no better than to be filthy. Good manners were no better than bad. Family life was derided as an outdated bourgeois concept. Criminals deserved as much sympathy as their victims. Many homes and classrooms became disorderly. After all, if there was neither right nor wrong, there could be no basis for punishment or reward. Violence and soft pornography became accepted in the media. Thus was sown the wind, and we are now reaping the whirlwind.
That was Innocence and Experience, the sixth and last programme in this documentary series, 1968, The Year of Dreams. The presenter was the British poet Geoff Nuttall. The production was by Alistair Wilson for the BBC London. Well, there's only 20 minutes or less left of this, the last ever Shipbuilding for Pleasure programme. So let's move on to 9 o'clock when Arnold Follows will be along with his bag of ambience. Here's another Shipbuilding for Pleasure favourite, Al Green and I Feel Good.
Something about can't keep
associates there with Breakfast Alone. Before that, Al Green, I Feel Good, which is how I feel after 20 years with the ABC and 13 with the double triple J, and now I'm about to leave. I was Graeme Bartlett, and as a final piece of self-indulgence, I'm going to finish with one of my all-time favourite sloppy, soppy, self-obsessed songs. It Could Have Been Worse. I could have played I Did It My Way. This is John Fox and My Sex. I hope you've enjoyed what I've done over the years. Good night and goodbye.
My sex waits for me like a mongrel waits downwind on a tightrope leash. My sex is a fragile acrobat. Sometimes I'm an overcane shot, sometimes I'm an automat. My sex is often solo, sometimes it short circuits then, sometimes it's a golden globe. My sex is invested in suburban photographs, skyscraper shadows on our car crash overpass.
So, is this the end of the world as we know it? As Graeme Bartlett and Shipbuilding for Treasure ride off slowly into the setting sun? I guess I should say what a pleasure it's been working with Graeme over the years, and certainly in the last 4 years following Shipbuilding. See you, cowboy. I'm going to miss you.